Imagine a wave, not of water, but of millions of gallons of thick, sticky molasses. In just seconds, people were running for their lives as the enormous brown wave tore through the streets of Boston. Buildings shook, wagons were swept away, and an entire neighborhood suddenly became the center of an unimaginable disaster. But here's what makes this story almost impossible to believe. The deadly flood wasn't water. It was molasses. So how could it become a deadly wave? The year was 1919. Boston was a growing industrial city, filled with workers, factories, and crowded neighborhoods. In the North End, families lived close together, while horse-drawn wagons moved through narrow streets every day. Workers headed to their jobs. Families went about their routines. Children played nearby. It seemed like an ordinary day. But towering above this neighborhood was a massive industrial structure, holding something that would soon change everything. It was an enormous steel tank, filled with more than 2 million gallons of molasses. The tank was enormous. Its steel walls towered over the surrounding buildings, storing an unimaginable amount of pressure. But there were warning signs. Dark molasses was leaking through the tank's seams. Workers and residents reportedly heard strange sounds coming from the massive structure. The tank showed signs of trouble. Leaks, stressed metal, and structural problems were already there, but no one expected what would happen next. On January 15, 1919, Boston woke to a surprisingly mild winter morning. Workers arrived at factories. Wagons moved through the streets. Life continued exactly as it always had. Nobody walking through the neighborhood knew that they were just moments away from one of America's strangest disasters. Above them, the giant tank stood silently, holding millions of gallons of heavy, sticky molasses. Then, without warning, the structure began to fail. The pressure inside was about to unleash something terrifying. Suddenly, the massive tank ruptured. Thousands of tons of molasses exploded outward with incredible force. The sound was enormous. Steel tore apart, debris flew through the air, and millions of gallons began rushing into the neighborhood. Then came the impossible sight. A gigantic wall of dark brown molasses moving through the streets like a tsunami. The wave was reportedly more than 15 feet high, towering over people, wagons, and buildings in its path. And now there was nowhere to hide. The massive wave slammed into the streets of Boston. People ran desperately. Some tried to escape toward higher ground, while others were caught completely off guard. Horse-drawn wagons were pushed aside as if they weighed nothing, while the thick liquid continued racing through the neighborhood. The waves smashed into buildings, damaged streets, and filled streets with debris and destruction. Some people became trapped inside the sticky flood, while others climbed onto rooftops and balconies to escape. In only a few terrifying moments, an ordinary part of Boston had become a massive disaster zone. Soon, rescuers rushed into the devastated neighborhood, facing streets covered in thick, sticky molasses. Using ladders, ropes, and whatever equipment they could find, rescuers began pulling survivors to safety. For hours, rescue workers searched through the wreckage, hoping to find people still alive beneath the destruction. When the disaster was finally over, the human cost was devastating. 21 people had lost their lives, and around 150 were injured. And then, the chaos gave way to silence. The neighborhood was left devastated, with streets, buildings, and vehicles covered in the sticky remains of the flood. The cleanup took weeks. Workers struggled to remove the molasses from streets, buildings, and everything it had touched. But the biggest question remained. How could such a massive industrial tank suddenly fail? The disaster led to a major legal battle, as families demanded answers and accountability for what had happened. Investigators examined the tank, the evidence, and the decisions that had allowed the structure to operate in the first place. Investigators eventually found serious weaknesses in the tank's construction. Its structure had not been strong enough to safely contain the enormous pressure. The disturbing truth was that warning signs had existed before the disaster, but they had not been taken seriously enough. The tragedy became a powerful lesson about engineering, safety standards, inspections, and corporate responsibility. Today, the Great Molasses Flood sounds almost unbelievable. A sweet substance became a deadly force, destroying a neighborhood and taking 21 lives. But behind this strange story is a serious reminder. Disasters often begin with warning signs that people choose to ignore. More than a century later, one question still remains. How many disasters could be prevented if we simply listened to the warnings before it was too late?